Welcome to the Relational Recovery Podcast. I'm your host, Wes Thompson, joined by my co-host, Austin Hill. Today we are talking about patience. So we hope this conversation is helpful, and thanks for listening. Hey, Austin, how are you?
Not bad. How are you, Wes?
I'm doing pretty good. Today, let's talk about patience.
Okay.
This is one that it's probably one of the things that I struggle with. I don't know if you're a judo patience guy, but I would say that this is one that I'm not. This is one that I could grow in a lot. Think about our culture as a whole. I think we prize speed. We prize instant gratification, probably more than most things. So patience is often seen as a vice and not a virtue, I think.
Yeah.
Delaying gratification isn't something that a lot of us like. And I think in recovery, where this is as practical is transformation is often slower than we anticipate. I was just having a conversation with someone, and it's a cliche statement, but I think it's how a lot of us feel sometimes. It's like, man, everything would be so much easier if people weren't involved, because people slow things down and make things so messy.
Yeah. People would be easy with that if it weren't for all the peopling that was required.
Right. Which takes effort, it takes time, makes things slower. Hence, patience.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any, I don't know, is there any opening thoughts that come to mind for you?
Man, I think just looking at some of the notes that you sent over and realizing that patience is something that it's like one of those unseen, you know it when you see it type of deals in other people, but it is something that is not acknowledged very often when it's healthy. Just because it's kind of like, if you're good at it, it just happens and it just goes unnoticed. But also, when it's not there, it's very, very apparent very quickly. There doesn't seem to be a middle ground where like, oh wow, they're just so patient. I don't hear that very often as a compliment, or I don't even remember saying it about people. It's just like one of those under the radar things. But what does come to mind, and I think, am I right in thinking when you list out the fruits of the Spirit, patient is the first one? Love is patient, love is kind. Yeah. And I don't know if that's on purpose, but it seems like a precursor to all the others.
It's definitely a character quality of God's character, or it's definitely placed in that list, right, of being a really good thing. And I think rightfully so, because of what we just mentioned. I mean, human beings don't change quickly,
Yeah, I think the other thing that just popped into my head that your question kind of like started off me thinking on, what does it look like? When do I see someone being patient? And it's typically where it's most, I think, relevant is when we are in conflict, or we see someone in conflict, and the person that is exhibiting or expressing the most love in that conflict is the one who is the most patient. That's like able to take the information and not react, but have the patience to respond, and be able to have the self-control with that patience to understand when it's about them and when it's about somebody else. Because usually, like, I think this is true of guys in the refuge, it's when someone's like yelling at you, it's usually not about you, it's about them. And having the patience with them to like say like, hey, you don't need to treat me that way. but I feel like you're reacting a bit bigger than what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
That takes a lot of patience.
Yeah, it does. It does. It reminds me of this this definition by Walter Elwell in the Baker Encyclopedia of the Bible, where he defines it as the ability to take a great deal of punishment from evil people or circumstances without losing one's temper, without becoming irritated and angry, or without taking vengeance. It takes the capacity to bear pain or trials without complaint, the ability to forbear under severe provocation, and the self-control which keeps one from acting rashly even though suffering opposition or adversity. Man, when I read that, that sounds really hard.
Yeah, because even what we were talking about before, this takes it to another level, what patience is, because we were talking about being able to see when somebody is attacking you, it's not really about you. But this definition says even when it is, like the person's intentionally going after you, and then not losing your temper. That's a lot bigger.
Yeah, the patience of Christ when he's literally suffering, about to die on the cross, dealing with a level of suffering that is unimaginable. Many historians would argue that crucifixion was probably one of the most awful ways to die in the history of the world. And for Jesus to be up on the cross and essentially look out on the people that put him there and say, like, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I never thought about it this way. Honestly, I don't know that I've thought about it this way till right now, but that wasn't only an act of like love and grace and forgiveness, but it was an act of patience, because a massive injustice was just done to him, right? And he's saying, like, he's basically, instead of going straight to anger, he's able to recognize the big picture, which I don't know about you, Austin, but when I'm faced with inconvenience and trouble, a lot of times the emotion gets the best of me. I can easily miss the big picture in that moment sometimes. So
Yeah. No, I think that's a very normal reaction. Not making the best choice when our emotions are intense.
I was talking to somebody else on staff, and they were just reflecting on, like, I think, maybe this will be relevant for some of the guys in the refuge to hear, but man, it's easier to do the right thing and to stay on the right path when things are easy, right? But when you're working really hard on your recovery or in your work or whatever, in relationship, when you're working really hard and things just aren't going the way that you want it to go, and maybe they're not even going well at all, I think there's this tendency to be like, well, I just quit then. I'll just give up then. Why am I even doing this then? And as I'm thinking about it, that seems to be, given the definition that we just read, a ripe opportunity to practice patience.
I think it would be helpful to figure out when it seems like there's a very fine line between being patient with somebody and allowing poor behavior. Like, what's the difference between, like, how do we identify when something needs to be said and when we need to be patient with them? Because I think there's I know personally, I will be like, I just need to be patient with this person, when in reality, I probably should have said something sooner.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask this, because when you say that, what comes to mind is, I don't know that patience is not saying something, but patience probably would dictate the manner in which we say it. for example, like this week, I had to have a hard conversation with somebody and wasn't looking forward to it. And quite frankly, I was pretty pissed off about it. But I was able to kind of like work that emotion prior to that conversation and go into it asking questions. Because in my opinion, like, mistakes were made, you know, and they needed to be addressed. So I think maybe this kind of addresses what you're saying. And after I'm done, you can respond. But like, I didn't go in accusing or assuming a lot. Like, I feel like I knew what happened, but I went in and I asked questions, pointed questions, calmly, and waited for a response before like having a verdict or whatever. And I think, and that was hard for me. And I think that's an example of patience, and maybe it's an example of what you're talking about. So maybe you can speak to that or respond to that, or maybe if that's not what you were kind of going with, maybe you can give an example of what you meant.
No, I think that it's one of those where it sounds like the act of patience isn't allowing bad behavior. It's the time, I guess, the effort that goes into allowing people the space to grow, and then being patient, and then like how we respond when people fail or when we fail with ourselves, but like for what we want to do. So it's more it sounds like it's patience is an attitude we take when things go poorly, even though like it's not abdicating our need to say something when something needs to change. It's us accepting that things are probably not going to change the way we want.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people in recovery that feel that way a lot of the time. Like, things are not happening at the speed they want, in the manner in which they want, you know. Like, I even think about guys who maybe have family members and they're getting healthy and better, but their family's not necessarily like excited about seeing them, you know, or maybe they're not forgiving them. All of that would require a great deal of patience, you know. I was talking to an alumni a few weeks ago, and he, you know, he went through a relapse, and like he was talking about how one of the reasons that he struggled in that way was that his daughters were not responding to him in the way that he hoped, because he'd really been pursuing them for a long time. And their poor, you know, their response that wasn't what he wanted. He started to tell himself a story that wasn't helpful, obviously, and that obviously he responded in, you know, using drugs. And where it's like, you know, that was, again, I'm not trying to sound like judgmental at all. I'm just saying, like, that was those kinds of things happen to all of us, right? Things don't go the way we want them to go. And I think that's where the category of patience comes in. Like, that's an invitation to be patient, right?
Yeah, I think what stood out to me with what you were saying is the story that we tell ourselves can have an impact on how patient we are or are not. Because if we're telling ourselves a story, especially when we're trying to be patient with someone we care about, if the story is like, man, if they don't get this fixed right now, the relationship's over, or it'll never improve. Like, if someone makes this mistake now, they'll always make that mistake. So if I don't respond big, they're not going to see how big of a deal this is. Yeah, it's So the stories we're telling ourselves, which often people like, I don't know what, like, we rarely know the story that people are telling themselves when they're communicating with us or when we're having conversations or conflict. And that is a big part of that. The stories that we tell ourselves will have a major impact on how we respond to each other. And it'll impact whether I'm going to be patient with someone or not. Because if the story is like, if they don't change, it's over, I'm probably going to have very little patience with them.
And I think sometimes we go that direction where we cut people off maybe too quickly. Because there's definitely a time and place to cut people off, but sometimes in our impatience, we can cut people off too quickly, or we can be really harsh in how we do it. But also there's, I think, this phenomenon, especially in the recovery community, where it's like, I'll show you, I'll hurt me. And in my impatience, I'll self-sabotage. And that was kind of, I think, an example of that's the case of the example I just gave a minute ago. It's like, you didn't respond the way I wanted you to, so I'm going to hurt myself.
As like punishment to you.
As punishment to you, which is very...
Yeah. So I'm going to hurt me to punish you.
Yeah.
Gosh. Yeah. That's my favorite trick.
Because nobody wins in that situation, right? Nobody wins.
Yeah. And I say that like I do that to the people I care about most. Like, it's just, I think it's not like that reaction, I'll show you, I'll hurt me. That's not something that goes away. The severity of the hurt adjusts as we get healthier. Because I would love to sit here and say, hey guys in the refuge, if you do follow the 7 principles, and you're like, you'll never hurt again. Like, no, that's not true. But I think what we're talking about now is patience is not a switch that you turn on and off. It's a dial that you can turn up the volume or down the volume depending on how healthy you are. And the reality is, if we believe, if people believe, and I do believe this, that we are always works in progress, which means we'll always be able to be more patient. So that's not if you're hearing it like, oh, I could always be more patient, so I'm just never going to be patient enough. That's not what we're saying. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there's an infinite amount of space for us to grow. And so we can always become more and more patient. And that's the only way you do that is you're given opportunities to pressure that patience. So if you feel like, man, I'm getting like, there's a joke, you never pray for patience because God will give you opportunities where you'll have to practice patience. I think that is everyday life as a Christian. It's also just everyday life for everybody. We just get to choose whether we want to practice it or not. And just like everything else, we talk about this a lot. It's like a muscle. The more you work it, the stronger it gets. So So if we believe that patience is good for us and more patience, more is better, then we're going to be given more stuff to be patient about. And I think it's one of those where the small things don't bother us as much, but the things that do bother us, that put pressure on that patience muscle, change over time. Mm. Mm-hmm. So I can give a funny example. I can't hear little kids screaming or crying or whining. It doesn't get to me anymore because I've had kids. My nieces and nephews are still small. If kids make a lot of noise, it's just kind of I don't hear it because that muscle, that patience muscle it's there because it's been worked. But I know that if I don't see a lot of kids for a long time, that muscle will probably deteriorate and I won't be as patient with little kids again. And I'll have to work on it again. So if we're thinking about I want to be more patient with my kids or my spouse or my friends, guess what? You're going to have to put pressure on that patience, on your ability to be patient with other people. So if you want this thing called patience to get stronger, that means you're going to have to be put in situations that require you to be patient.
That's good. It's true.
This is a classic, the obstacle is the way situation.
Say more to that.
So the way to become more patient is to put yourself in situations where you need more patience. So in order to be patient, be more patient, I have to put myself in really stressful. I have I know that I have to go through difficult things to grow in patience. I can't think about being patient and say, man, I really want to be more patient, and then never have a situation where I have to practice it. I can't just think myself into it. I have to proactively be aware of like, my patience is being pushed right now. I have to like, this is growing. It's the story I'm telling myself. Like we talked about earlier, the story is like, hey, this is man, I am losing my cool internally. I want to yell at this person. That's the signal. Be like, the obstacle is I'm not very patient, but in order to be patient, to grow in that, I have to go through these moments of intense pressure to grow in patience. So again, the way through it, the obstacle is the way. So sometimes the things we want to avoid is like, oh man, I'm just not a patient person, so I'm not gonna deal with these difficult things because I'm not patient. Well, you're avoiding the thing you need, which is more patience.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good.
Yeah.
Let me read this passage in James so we can kind of anchor this in some scripture. Because the Bible says a lot about patience. But this passage in particular, I think, is helpful. James 5, 7 through 11 reads, "Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it, until it receives the early and late rains. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. As an example of suffering and patience, brothers, the judge is standing at the door." Or sorry, I misread that. "As an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You've heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you've seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful." There's a lot in there. Man, seeing the steadfastness of Job, we don't have time now, but goodness gracious, to compare ourselves to Job would be, I think, a little bit extreme, at least for me, because I've never gone through anything like that. I don't want to go through anything like that. Then to talk about like the metaphor of a farmer. I don't know much about farming, but what I do know is that you don't plant seeds and then poof, there's corn. It takes time. It takes time. And it takes cultivating. Like it takes like good soil and water and sun and waiting. A lot of waiting.
A lot of waiting.
A lot of waiting. So I don't know, like when you heard me, like when you read that and heard me read it, like what, is there anything that stands out to you in that passage, in that text?
It's, I think that we can get lost in the idea. It's like, well, I just have to be this inactive person, just like sitting around waiting, but waiting doesn't have to be inactive. I think it points, I think verse 9, do not grumble against one another, brothers. It's kind of like it's catching something before it gets out of hand. So knowing that, hey, when I'm patient, my like nerves are going to be a little fried. So I'm going to lash out at people around me that have nothing to do with what I'm being pressed on. So it's being aware how growing in patience is going to affect me, and how I can choose to release that pressure by, taking it out on the people I care about. That's not how to be more patient. So it's not one of those, man, it also says an example of suffering and patience. So it's like the same. It's like patience is a suffering. It's a suffering thing. Yeah. patience sucks. Like, it's just one of those things. Like, it's not like it doesn't look fun. It's just like, yeah, gosh, it is. Yeah, it's tough. But I think being honest about that is important, because I think people want to just like put these like rose colored glasses over our difficult situations in life and be like, oh, see, God just, he does have a greater plan for us, but sometimes that plan is painful. Like, and being a really patient person, like the reason why I don't respond to little kids yelling all the time is because I had a lot of kids yelling at me a lot, and that's exhausting if you're not used to it. Like, it's just kind of like, what in the world? I created this army that's trying to kill me, and I'm supposed to love these little terrorists, but God gave them, trusted them to me, so now I have to like figure out, how do I deal with this? And it's like, you ask anybody who deals with like 0 to 4 is crazy with kids. They're just nuts. Anybody who says they loved every minute of it is lying. So, like, there are beautiful moments in it, but it's like one of those, like, you grew in patience because of it.
Yeah, as someone who really struggles with patience, I think what does help me, again, I'm not saying this like I've figured it out, but I'm saying what does help me is just reflecting on the reality, like, of how much patience I've required others and God. In other words, God's been very patient with me. There's people that have had to be very patient with me in my immaturity, in my failures, in my sin, in my folly. You think about a perfect God, right? God could have just been like, I'm done with you. I'm tired of you.
Yeah.
And he doesn't. And just to think, man, I'm so grateful. Like when I look at it from that perspective, it's like I want all the patience I can get. And so I think it's an invitation to, man, can I use my imagination and imagine how patient God's been with me, how patient my loved ones have been with me? Can I try to like bottle some of that up and use that as fuel when I'm tasked with being patient towards other people and towards situations that just require a lot of patience?
Yeah, I think if we I think for those of us who maybe didn't grow up in church, or this whole God thing is new, another good example is think about the people who has been genuinely patient with me in moments where I didn't deserve it. We usually have a pretty close connection to them, or we value that person a lot. So knowing that, like, hey, they didn't have to do that for me, but they're expressing that, they're being patient, is a incredibly loving thing to do. It's a different way of showing love. And I'm just thinking, like, people who have been most patient with me, it's like my wife, a lot of people at work, that have been able to, that I think you're able to be patient with somebody when you care deeply about them. Yeah, I think if we think it's like, why should I be patient with somebody? It's because it's one of the best ways to show them that you love them. Now, that doesn't mean we allow bad behavior without consequences, but it's the difference between, trying to find the right connection, the right comparison. If we're wanting to show someone that we really love them, it does require consequences often, but the patience comes with giving people the opportunity, like to be in your life again, to like give them a second chance. That's usually where most patience goes towards, is giving people a second chance, a second 100th chance. So,
Well, Austin, 30 minutes in.
dang.
God bless you in being a more patient man.
Mm-hmm.
I pray the same is true for me. So I pray the same is true for anyone listening. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Relational Recovery Podcast. We'll be back soon with a new conversation. We'll see you then.